February 9, 1942. The SS Normandy, one of the world's most magnificent ocean liners, lies capsized in New York Harbor, over $100 million worth of military equipment destroyed. Thousands of troops that should be heading to Europe are stranded, and the U.S. Navy has a terrifying suspicion. This wasn't an accident. German submarines are prowling America's coastline, sinking ships with deadly precision. Someone on the docks is feeding them information. Someone who knows every ship movement, every cargo manifest, every sailing schedule. The waterfront belongs to organized crime, and the Navy can't penetrate it. So they're about to do something unprecedented, something that will remain classified for 3 decades. They're going to cut a deal with the most powerful gangster in America, a man currently locked in maximum security, serving 30 to 50 years. His name is Charles Lucky Luciano, and what happens next will corrupt American intelligence agencies for generations. To understand this story, you need to understand who Lucky Luciano really was, because he wasn't just another gangster. He was the man who invented modern organized crime. Born Salvatore Lucania in Lercara Fritti, Sicily, in 1897, young Charlie arrived in New York's Lower East Side in 1906. By age 14, he was running protection rackets. By 20, he was muscle for the mob. By 30, he was planning something no one had attempted before, the complete reorganization of the American underworld. The 1920s Mafia was chaos. Italian gangs fought Irish gangs. Brooklyn families warred with Manhattan families. The Castellamherst War of 1930–1931 turned New York streets into battlefields. Bodies dropped daily. Police pressure intensified. It was unsustainable. Luciano saw the future clearly. The ethnic gang wars were bad for business. Too much violence meant too much attention. Too much attention meant everyone lost money. So in 1931, Lucky Luciano orchestrated something extraordinary. First, he arranged the murders of the 2 most powerful old guard mafia bosses, Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Both men clung to the old Sicilian ways, the feudal hierarchy that kept families at war. Then Luciano did something revolutionary. He called a meeting. Not just Italian crime families, but Jewish gangsters, Irish bosses, every major criminal organization in America. Mayor Lansky, Frank Costello, Bugsy Siegel, Dutch Schultz, they all came to the table. Luciano's proposal was simple but brilliant. The Commission, a governing body that would function like a corporate board of directors. 5 families would control New York. Other cities would have their own recognized territories. Disputes would be settled by vote, not violence. Unauthorized hits would bring consequences from all families together. It was organized crime's version of the United Nations. And it worked. Almost overnight, the gang wars stopped. Profits soared. Luciano's syndicate began pulling in an estimated $10 million annually, over $200 million in today's money. They controlled unions, politicians, judges, and police captains. The docks, the garment district, the restaurants, the nightclubs, it all flowed through Luciano's network. He operated from the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, Suite 39C, conducting business like a CEO. He wore custom suits, dined at the finest restaurants, and dated showgirls. He seemed absolutely untouchable. But he had one enemy who wouldn't be bought: Thomas E. Dewey. Dewey was a young, ambitious special prosecutor with political aspirations and a genuine hatred of organized crime. He'd tried for years to build a case against Luciano for murder, bootlegging, or racketeering. Nothing stuck. Luciano's lawyers were too good, his insulation too complete. So Dewey went after him for something unexpected: compulsory prostitution. The case was built on testimony from prostitutes and madams who ran brothels across New York. They testified that Luciano controlled a network of hundreds of prostitutes, taking a cut from every transaction. It wasn't murder, wasn't glamorous, but it was provable. On April 1, 1936, Lucky Luciano was arrested. On June 7th, he was convicted on 62 counts. The sentence: 30 to 50 years in state prison. Judge Philip J. McCook made it clear Luciano would die behind bars. He was sent to Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, known as Little Siberia for its brutal conditions and remote location near the Canadian border. The king of the underworld was locked away in one of America's toughest prisons. His empire should have crumbled. It didn't. Even from prison, Luciano controlled the commission through intermediaries. His orders were carried out without question. The docks still answered to him. The Union still paid tribute. Nothing moved in New York Harbor without Lucky Luciano's approval. And in 1942, when America was desperate, when Nazi U-boats were bleeding the nation dry, when saboteurs were everywhere and the Navy had nowhere to turn, that control would become the most valuable commodity in America. Someone in Naval Intelligence was about to have a very dangerous idea. February 9th, 1942, started as an ordinary Monday at Pier 88 in Manhattan. Workers swarmed over the SS Normandy, the magnificent French ocean liner seized by the United States after France fell to Nazi occupation. The Navy was converting her into a troop ship. She would carry 15,000 soldiers at a time across the Atlantic. The work was behind schedule. Pressure was intense. Corners were being cut. At approximately 2:30 p.m., sparks from a worker's acetylene torch ignited a pile of Kapok-filled life preservers. Kapok is highly flammable. Within seconds, the fire spread. Within minutes, it was out of control. Workers fled the ship as flames consumed the main salon. The fire department arrived quickly, but they made a catastrophic error. They pumped millions of gallons of water into the upper decks without considering weight distribution. By 6:45 p.m., the Normandy began to list. By 2:45 a.m. on February 10th, she had completely capsized at her pier, 83,000 tons of luxury liner lying on her side in the Hudson River like a beached whale. 128 men were injured. The financial loss was staggering, nearly $100 million, but the strategic loss was incalculable. The Normandy would never sail again. The official Navy inquiry concluded it was an accident. Careless workers, flammable materials, poor safety protocols. But Naval Intelligence wasn't convinced, because they knew something the public didn't, something that terrified them. The East Coast was under attack. From January to April 1942, German U-boats operated with near impunity along the American coast. They called it Operation Drumbeat, the second happy time. Nazi submarines surfaced at night off New Jersey, Virginia, and Florida, torpedoing tankers and cargo ships silhouetted against the bright coastal cities that refused to implement blackouts. In just 4 months, over 200 American ships were sent to the bottom. Thousands of sailors died. Oil slicks burned on the ocean surface for days. Bodies washed up on tourist beaches. The U-boats seemed to have perfect intelligence. They knew shipping schedules, cargo manifests, and convoy routes. They struck with precision, then vanished. Naval Intelligence suspected the waterfront was compromised. The New York waterfront in 1942 was a closed world. Generations of Italian, Irish, and Eastern European immigrants worked the docks. They loaded cargo, operated cranes, managed warehouses, and controlled access to every ship in the harbor. They also controlled the unions. The International Longshoremen's Association was thoroughly infiltrated by organized crime. Union leadership positions were bought and sold. Jobs were handed out based on family connections and mob loyalty. Outsiders weren't welcome. The Navy tried to place intelligence officers on the docks. They stood out immediately and were frozen out. Dock workers wouldn't talk to them. Foremen wouldn't answer questions. Information dried up the moment anyone official appeared. The problem was simple. The dock workers didn't trust the government. Many were immigrants or first-generation Americans. Some had family in Italy, now an enemy nation. They feared deportation, investigation, or persecution, but they trusted the mob. The mob gave them jobs. The mob protected them. The mob was their community. And the mob was controlled by one man, Lucky Luciano. Somewhere in the 3rd Naval District headquarters in Manhattan, someone had an idea so audacious, so potentially scandalous, that it could only be discussed in the most secure rooms. What if we asked the Mafia for help? The man who would execute this idea was Commander Charles Radcliffe Haffenden, a wealthy attorney who joined Naval Intelligence after Pearl Harbor. Haffenden was smart, connected, and willing to bend rules for results. He understood something crucial. You couldn't approach Lucky Luciano directly. Even in prison, Luciano was cautious. He wouldn't talk to Navy officers. He'd assume it was a setup, another attempt to build a case against him. Haffenden needed an intermediary, someone Luciano trusted absolutely, someone who could explain the offer and guarantee it was legitimate. He needed Mayor Lansky. Mayor Lansky was Lucky Luciano's oldest friend and closest advisor. They'd grown up together on the Lower East Side, built their empire together, and maintained absolute loyalty to each other. Lansky ran the Jewish mob but sat on Luciano's commission. He was brilliant, calculating, and fiercely patriotic. Lansky hated the Nazis with a burning passion. His family had fled persecution in Russia. He saw Hitler as an existential threat not just to Jews, but to America itself. In the 1930s, Lansky had even organized Jewish gangsters to break up Nazi rallies in New York, beating brownshirts in the streets. If anyone could convince Luciano to help the war effort, it was Mayor Lansky. In the spring of 1942, Commander Haffenden made contact through intermediaries. A meeting was arranged at the Astor Hotel in Manhattan. Haffenden made his pitch. The Navy needed eyes and ears on the waterfront. They needed to know who was talking to Germans, who was passing information, who could be trusted. They needed the sabotage to stop. And they were willing to make a deal. Lansky listened carefully. Then he said what Haffenden already knew. You need to talk to Charlie. Arranging a meeting between Mayor Lansky and Lucky Luciano wasn't simple. Luciano was in Great Meadow Prison in Comstock, New York, serving hard time. Visits were monitored. Conversations were logged. The prison warden would want to know why one of America's most notorious gangsters was meeting with another. But Naval Intelligence had resources. In early May 1942, strings were pulled. Luciano was transferred from Dannemora to Great Meadow, a less harsh facility closer to Albany. The official reason was good behavior and cooperation. The real reason was access. On May 12, 1942, Mayor Lansky walked into Great Meadow Prison. The guards knew who he was, but they'd been told to allow the visit. No recording devices, no monitoring, complete privacy. This alone should have raised red flags about government cooperation with the mob. Luciano listened as Lansky explained the situation. The Navy was desperate. U-boats were destroying American shipping. The waterfront was suspected of being compromised. Naval Intelligence couldn't penetrate the docks because the workers didn't trust them. But they trusted Lucky. The Navy wanted information. Who's talking to Germans? Who's sympathetic to the Axis? What ships are being targeted? They wanted the sabotage to stop. They wanted the flow of intelligence to German submarines cut off. And they were offering something in return. Consideration for early release after the war. Luciano was no fool. He knew this was dangerous. If word got out that he was helping the government, he'd be labeled a rat, the worst thing you could be in the underworld. His authority would evaporate. He might not survive it, but Luciano also saw opportunity. He'd been in prison for 6 years, facing decades more. This was his only chance at freedom. And despite being a criminal, Luciano was also pragmatic. He was an American. His fortune was built on American capitalism. If the Nazis won, if America fell, his empire meant nothing. More cynically, Luciano understood leverage. The government needed him. That meant he could negotiate. Luciano agreed to help, but he laid out conditions. First, everything had to go through Mayor Lansky. Luciano wouldn't meet with Naval Intelligence directly. Too risky, too visible. Lansky would be the intermediary. Second, Luciano's cooperation had to remain absolutely secret. If word leaked that he was working with the government, the deal was off, and he'd deny everything. Third, and most important, after the war, Luciano wanted out. Complete pardon or, at minimum, commutation of his sentence and deportation to Italy. He wanted his freedom. Commander Haffenden couldn't promise that. He didn't have the authority, but he indicated that if Luciano's help proved valuable, if it genuinely aided the war effort, arrangements could be made at the highest levels. It was vague, it was risky, it was completely unofficial, and Luciano took it. The operation needed a code name. Naval Intelligence chose Operation Underworld, admirably honest about who they were dealing with. Within days, word went out through the commission. Lucky's orders were absolute: cooperate with Naval Intelligence, provide information, watch for saboteurs, protect American shipping. The response was immediate. Frank Costello, acting boss of the Luciano family on the outside, began coordinating with Haffenden's team. Longshoremen's union officials, many of them mob-connected, received instructions. Warehouse managers got the message. Even small-time runners and collectors were told to keep their eyes open. Suddenly, Naval Intelligence had an army of informants on the docks. Suspicious characters asking questions about ship movements. Reported immediately. Workers with German accents or Italian fascist sympathies. Identified and tracked. Strange activity around ships or warehouses. Investigated by mob enforcers before Naval Intelligence even knew about it. The Mafia didn't just provide intelligence. They provided enforcement. When dock workers were found passing information to Axis agents, they didn't get arrested, they disappeared. Quietly. Permanently. No trials, no publicity, no legal complications. It was brutal. It was illegal. And it was extraordinarily effective. Extraordinarily effective. Within months, the situation on the waterfront transformed completely. Sabotage incidents dropped to nearly zero. The flow of information to German U-boats slowed, then stopped. American shipping became more secure. Cargo moved faster and safer. Naval Intelligence was getting better information from the mob than from their own agents. Names of suspected Axis sympathizers. Details on Union corruption that could aid enemy operations. Even advance warning of potential strikes or labor disruptions that could cripple war production. The German intelligence network in New York Harbor was systematically destroyed not by the FBI, not by Naval Intelligence, but by the Mafia. And Lucky Luciano, sitting in prison, was orchestrating it all through Mayor Lansky. But Operation Underworld was about to expand far beyond the New York docks. By late 1942, the Allies were planning the invasion of North Africa, with Sicily to follow in 1943. Sicily would be the first major Allied landing in Axis-controlled Europe, a crucial stepping stone to invading Italy and eventually defeating Nazi Germany. There was just one problem. Allied intelligence knew almost nothing about Sicily. They had maps, but they were outdated. They didn't know which ports could handle invasion fleets. They didn't know which roads could support tanks. They didn't know which local officials could be bribed and which were loyal fascists. But Lucky Luciano knew Sicily intimately. He was born there. He had family there. And most importantly, he had connections to the Sicilian Mafia, La Cosa Nostra. Naval Intelligence came back to Haffenden with a new request. Could Luciano provide intelligence on Sicily? Could he help prepare the ground for invasion? Luciano could do better than that. He could deliver Sicily to them. Here's what most people don't understand about the Sicilian Mafia in 1943. They hated Mussolini. The fascist dictator had spent 20 years trying to destroy the Sicilian Mafia. He'd sent a brutal prefect named Cesare Mori to Sicily in the 1920s with unlimited authority. Mori arrested thousands of suspected mafiosi, tortured confessions, and executed suspected bosses without trial. The Sicilian mafia was decimated but not destroyed. Survivors went underground or fled to America, including Luciano's own relatives. They waited for their chance at revenge. Luciano reached out through secret channels. Messages passed from New York to mafia families in Palermo, Agrigento, and other Sicilian strongholds. The Americans are coming. Help them and Mussolini falls. Refuse, and you'll be destroyed along with the fascists. The Sicilian mafia chose the Americans. When Allied forces landed in Sicily on July 10, 1943, they found local guides waiting for them. Mafiosi who knew every road, every bridge, every shortcut through the mountains. They identified which Italian officers would surrender and which would fight. They provided intelligence on German positions. They even recruited local fighters to harass Axis forces. The invasion of Sicily, planned to take months, succeeded in just 38 days. Lucky Luciano, from his prison cell, had helped deliver an entire island to the Allied forces, and now the government owed him. By 1945, the war was over. Nazi Germany had surrendered. Japan had been defeated. America emerged as the world's dominant superpower, and Lucky Luciano sat in Great Meadow Prison, waiting for the government to honor their deal. The problem was simple. There was no official deal. Nothing was in writing. No formal agreement existed between Naval Intelligence and Luciano. Commander Haffenden had made verbal assurances, but he lacked authority to promise clemency or pardon. The entire operation had been conducted in the shadows, deliberately kept off the books to avoid political scandal. Now the bill was coming due, and the government had to decide. Do we honor an illegal agreement with one of America's most notorious criminals? The decision fell to Thomas E. Dewey, the same man who had prosecuted and convicted Luciano 9 years earlier. By 1945, Dewey was governor of New York with presidential ambitions. He'd built his political career on being tough on crime, particularly organized crime. His conviction of Lucky Luciano had been his signature achievement. Now Naval Intelligence officials were quietly approaching him with an extraordinary request: grant executive clemency to Luciano based on secret wartime services. Dewey was in an impossible position. If he released Luciano without explanation, he'd be accused of corruption or incompetence. If he explained the truth that the U.S. government had cut a deal with the mafia, it would create a massive scandal that could destroy his political future. But Dewey was also a pragmatist. Naval Intelligence made it clear. Luciano had delivered. The waterfront had been secured. Sicily had fallen faster than anyone predicted. American servicemen were alive because of intelligence Luciano had provided. And there was another consideration. If the government broke its word to Luciano, what would that mean for future intelligence operations? Would anyone trust deals with American intelligence agencies again? On January 3, 1946, Governor Thomas E. Dewey issued an executive order granting clemency to Charles Luciano. The official statement was masterfully vague. Upon the entry of the United States into the war, Luciano's aid was sought by the armed services in inducing others to provide information concerning possible enemy attack. It appears that he cooperated in such effort, though the actual value of the information procured is not clear. Translation: he helped somehow, but we're not giving details. The key phrase was "not clear," protecting both Dewey and the Navy from having to disclose Operation Underworld's true scope. There was one condition: Luciano would not be released into American society. He would be immediately deported to Italy as an undesirable alien. For Luciano, it was enough. After serving just 10 years of a 30 to 50-year sentence, he was going free. On February 9, 1946, exactly 4 years after the Normandy disaster, Lucky Luciano was escorted to Brooklyn's Bush Terminal. He would board the SS Laura Keene, a Liberty ship bound for Genoa, Italy. What happened next showed how powerful Luciano still was. Over 300 people came to see him off. Mobsters, associates, union officials, politicians, they lined the dock like he was a departing king, not a deported criminal. Reporters swarmed the scene. Photographers captured images of Luciano, impeccably dressed, smiling and waving. Mayor Lansky was there, of course. Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, Carlo Gambino. The entire commission leadership came to pay respects. The government had wanted this deportation to be quiet, shameful. Instead, it looked like a celebration. As the Lorraine pulled away from the dock, Lucky Luciano stood at the rail, waving. He'd beaten a 50-year sentence. He'd made the United States government dance to his tune. And he was returning to Italy not as a broken man, but as a legend. What the cheering crowd didn't know, what the American public wouldn't learn for another 30 years, was the full truth of what Luciano had done and what it had cost. Yes, he'd helped secure the waterfront. Yes, he'd aided the Sicily invasion. But he'd also established a template that would corrupt American intelligence operations for decades. He'd proven that the U.S. government would make deals with criminals when desperate enough. That national security could justify anything. That official policy and actual practice were two different things. And Luciano wasn't done. From Italy, he would continue to run his empire, smuggle drugs into America, and maintain connections with the very intelligence agencies that had claimed to deport him. As the Lorraine disappeared over the horizon, Naval Intelligence officers breathed sighs of relief. The operation was over. Luciano was gone. The secret was safe. They were wrong on all counts. Operation Underworld was just beginning to show its true consequences. And the CIA, about to be created from the remnants of wartime intelligence agencies, would take everything the Navy had learned from dealing with Lucky Luciano and expand it into a global strategy. The secret deal with the Mafia was about to become standard operating procedure. The U.S. government believed that deporting Luciano to Italy would end his influence over American organized crime. They were spectacularly wrong. Within months of arriving in Italy, Luciano had established himself in Naples and was running operations across Europe. But more importantly, he never lost control of his American empire. Using intermediaries and coded communications, Luciano continued to give orders to the commission. Major decisions about territory, rackets, and leadership still required his approval. The five families in New York still considered him the boss of bosses, even in absentia. In 1947, Luciano traveled to Havana, Cuba, staying at the Hotel National. Officially, he was on vacation. In reality, he'd organized a summit meeting of every major American mob boss. Mayor Lansky was there, Frank Costello, Vito Genovese, Santo Trafficante Jr. They discussed drug trafficking, casino operations, and the future of organized crime. The meeting proved Luciano was still in charge, and that deportation meant nothing. American authorities panicked. They pressured the Cuban government to expel him, but the damage was done. Luciano had demonstrated that borders couldn't contain him. More disturbing, there's evidence that U.S. intelligence agencies knew about the Havana meeting in advance and did nothing to stop it. In 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency was created from the Office of Strategic Services. Many OSS officers who'd worked with organized crime during the war transferred to the new agency, and they brought their playbook with them. Throughout the late 1940s and 1950s, the CIA maintained contact with mob figures, including associates of Lucky Luciano. In Italy, they used mafia connections to funnel money to anti-communist politicians. The Christian Democrats received millions in covert CIA funding, much of it laundered through mob-controlled businesses. The logic was simple. Better the mafia than the communists. In 1960, this relationship reached its peak of absurdity. The CIA recruited mob hitmen, including Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante Jr. both commissioned members to assassinate Fidel Castro. They provided poison pills, weapons, and planning support for multiple assassination attempts. All of them failed, but the attempts continued into the mid-1960s. The CIA had learned from Operation Underworld that organized crime could be a useful tool. Mobsters didn't worry about laws or ethics. They could do things official government agents couldn't, and they kept their mouths shut. The darkest legacy of Operation Underworld emerged in the 1950s, the French connection. Luciano, from his base in Italy, helped establish a drug trafficking network that smuggled heroin from Turkey through Sicily and Marseille, France, into the United States. The operation was sophisticated, using legitimate shipping companies and corrupted officials. Tons of heroin flooded into American cities. The drug addiction crisis of the 1950s and 60s was directly traceable to networks that Luciano helped create. And there's evidence, disputed but persistent, that some American intelligence officers looked the other way. During the Cold War, anti-communist allies in Europe and Asia were given freedom to traffic drugs as long as they remained loyal to American interests. The template established with Luciano making deals with criminals for strategic purposes had metastasized into something far darker. For 25 years, Operation Underworld remained classified. Journalists who investigated were stonewalled. Naval Intelligence denied everything. The official position was that Luciano had provided minor assistance and received no special treatment. Then in 1954, Thomas Dewey published his memoirs. He included a brief mention that Luciano had helped during the war but provided no details. Slowly, the story began to leak. In the 1960s, a few brave journalists started connecting dots. Mayor Lansky, in rare interviews, smiled knowingly but said nothing concrete. The breakthrough came in 1977 when journalist Rodney Campbell published The Luciano Project, using newly declassified documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. For the first time, the American public learned the full scope of Operation Underworld. The reaction was explosive. The idea that the U.S. government had cut deals with the Mafia, then continued working with organized crime for decades, shattered public trust in intelligence agencies. Lucky Luciano died on January 26, 1962, at Naples Airport. He was 64 years old. He'd been meeting with a film producer to discuss a movie about his life when he collapsed from a heart attack. Even in death, controversy followed him. The U.S. government initially refused to allow his body to be returned to America. Only after intense lobbying by his family and associates did they relent. He's buried in St. John's Cemetery in Queens, New York. His grave is simple, marked only with his name and dates. No mention of his empire, his power, or his deal with the government. Thousands attended his funeral. Mayor Lansky wept openly. Lucky Luciano's deal with Naval Intelligence seemed like a simple wartime expedient. Help secure the waterfront, aid the invasion of Sicily, gain early release. But it established a precedent that would haunt American intelligence for generations. When national security is threatened, there are no rules. Any ally will do, even the Mafia. Ends justify means. The CIA would work with drug traffickers in Southeast Asia during Vietnam, with death squads in Latin America during the Cold War, with warlords in Afghanistan and Iraq. Every time, they justified it as necessary. Every time, they pointed to precedents like Operation Underworld. Was it worth it? Did Luciano's intelligence justify releasing one of America's most dangerous criminals? Did it justify the decades of corruption that followed? The government has never answered those questions. What we know is this. In 1942, America was desperate. Desperation led them to make a deal they would hide for 30 years and regret for much longer. This was Operation Underworld, the CIA's secret deal with Lucky Luciano, the classified files, the mob connections, the deals they don't want you to know about. Subscribe for more hidden history. Comment below. Should the government have made this deal?